Great. Hello and welcome to Shaman Sister Sessions, episode 44, Dearly Departed and the Day of the Dead. I'm Michelle Hawk, and I'm here with my shaman sister, Katherine Bird. This podcast grew out of our conversations and our friendship, our sisterhood together over the years. We would have these amazing talks about what does it mean to practice to have a spiritual practice. What does it mean to be a shaman? What does it mean to do this work in the world? As well as many stories and outrageous experiences of our own experiences with our personal practice with our clients. And eventually we decided, actually about a year ago, almost exactly, we decided to make these conversations public to you. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I personally, I like to do a little tiny check-in. I just got back from 8 days in Sedona, Arizona, which is why we're meeting on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. And oh my goodness, what a trip. I have a lot of new stuff that's coming through, a lot of information that's being processed. And I have to say, Kat, it felt so good to sleep in my own bed last night and wake up completely in my own energy in my house and do my practice this morning and just be back in my life. It felt so good because Sedona was a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I don't have any I don't have any exciting travel news. I got a bird feeder, so I have this ridiculous birdville outside my house, which is super exciting for me.
Awesome.
Yeah. It's my latest and greatest news. Yeah, and yeah, I feel like I haven't seen you in a really long time.
I know. I was not exactly off the grid in Sedona, but I was so busy doing other things that, yeah, I don't know. It was crazy. It was like I was in a different reality. So anyone who's been to Sedona probably can also attest to, and Kat, I know you've been there, but I can probably attest to it's like you get zapped into a different dimension for a while and stirred up real fast. And the whole place is, I have to say, it was not nurturing at all. It was not a nice, comfy, healing container. And I know that people go there for healing, but fuck no, that's not as far as I'm concerned, that's not a healing place. It's an activating place.
Yeah.
And there is a vast difference. And I don't know if that's Sacred Sites episode. So I'm going to put a pause in that container, or put a pause in that topic right now, because we have this whole other episode planned on sacred sites. So, but let's get to Day of the Dead, our dearly departed ones.
Yeah. So let's just talk about it. What are we talking about in this, in this tradition? And what's it all about? Why should we care about this Day of the Dead?
Why should we care about the dead?
Yeah, why should we care about dead people?
Because we love them. We care. Yeah, that's where we come from. And we have in past episodes touched upon various facets of this. We've touched upon in our channeling and mediumship episodes, working on channeling the deceased and working in mediumship with those who have passed on. We've touched upon this in our ancestry episode when we had special guest Tony Reynolds on. So if you missed some of those, I encourage you to go back. But I do a lot of work with the deceased in different capacities. And Kat, I know that you've done some work with this as well for yourself, and about doing ancestral clearing with that friend of yours about the Salem witch stuff. And so, yeah, go back and watch it. I don't remember which episode that was, but it was a really good one. Ancestry. Yeah, it was the ancestry one. And so we, working with the dead is a vital component. I really do believe it's a very vital component to any spiritual practice. And this is present in some form or another in any spiritual or religious tradition. Having what does death What is death? Where do we go when we die? How can we communicate, or how do we honor, or how do we separate ourselves from even that too, from those we love once they have crossed over?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that, you know, when we look at ancient civilizations, that one of the like deciding factors of whether this, you know, group of people had a certain level of consciousness was what they did with their dead. And like, as soon as they start finding that they buried their dead with intention, and they buried, you know, foodstuffs or weapons or clothes and, you know, different things with their dead, then all of a sudden that civilization reaches a different level of consciousness in the minds of these scientists to state that, oh, they must have been having these more, you know, thoughts that were around spirituality, that were around, you know, who we are as humans, that we exist after death. And the concept of existing after death is pretty much universal. There are, you know, the concept of like you die and there's nothing more is almost more of a modern phenomenon, like push back against religion, than traditionally all over the world. People just believed, you know, something happened to you after you die, where you continued in some kind of way to another plane of existence.
I want to touch also upon you know, so this honoring of the dead is not a uniquely human function either. No. There are non-human animals who have also been observed holding some kind of rites for the dead. So crows and ravens are an example of this.
Elephants mourn their dead quite extensively.
Elephants, dolphins also. There have been studies that have shown the living pod of dolphins supporting the deceased dolphin and swimming it in circles and singing these certain songs, swimming it up to, so like it could breathe, but it's not breathing. And so then they do this for a while, and then they let the body fall to the ocean floor. So yeah, there are, and with elephants also, there's this, you know, standing around in the circle and protecting the body.
And there's like swaying, and they're all, you know, crying. Actually, their tears are coming out of their eyes, and mourning. And you know, even we can look at, I'm sure, for those of us who have pets, who have had, you know, multiple pets in their home, and then like one pet dies, like you see this deep mourning that can go on for a dog or cat, where it is such a almost like a human experience of seeing them go through the grieving process.
Absolutely. And this is, again, not just a mammal thing. So, you know, because it's easy to look at, oh, well, dolphins and humans and apes, right? There we have this mammalian connection. And yet, you know, we see this in the birds, right? We see this in the crows, in the flock of crows. We see this in domestic birds as well. And I am less familiar, admittedly, I'm less familiar with reptilian studies, for example, around grief, but I'm sure there is that there, you know, like, again, all these animals go back to our animal guides and teachers. They are these profoundly spiritual beings with purposes and understandings of their own as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting how much our awareness and our consciousness around death has changed. It is, I feel like in some circles, like I'm reading more articles and more people writing about being more, like allowing ourselves to be more connected to death. But for such a long time, there's been this push to sort of like, okay, someone dies, like cover them up, get them out of here, get them to the, you know, more, get them pumped full of chemicals, like put makeup on them. And like we, as family members and loved ones of people who are dying, have been encouraged to not be very involved in that process, where in the past, when your loved one died, you were more than likely, you were there throughout the whole process of them dying. As they died, you were there they were in their bed, like you sat with them, you prayed, you were there for days at a time, like being present with their body, you cleaned their body, you prepared it, you dressed it, you were very intimate with the aspects of death. And we just don't have the same connection to that, especially in our Western modern society, that connection with death. And even I've read articles recently of people who have chosen to have that as their reality, where, well, you know what, I decided to leave my wife's body in the bedroom and everyone came and saw it, and really being like attacked for wanting to have this like sick way of being with the dead.
Mm-hmm. It's such a primal thing. You know, you talked about the idea of there is nothing once you are dead. It is a very modern idea. You know, throughout all of human history, again, you look at pretty much every tradition, every culture, every, you know, again, looking at vast spectrum of human history, there has universally in our societies been a function of some kind of honoring the dead, of you know, at least in terms of you know, those who are in our groups. You know, of course, like you look at times of war, or you look at times of genocide, for example, and the way that the dead were treated was very different. You know, in terms of the enemy, or in terms of the lower people, or the people who were being exterminated. Like, you know, that's a whole other thing. And yet you look at how the dead were treated and have been treated, of our loved ones. Again, we're talking like dearly departed ones here. And have like your birth, right? Again, that used to be also like you gave birth in your house with your family around you, or, you know, some in different traditions, like you would go off by yourself and deliver your baby yourself, right?
It's breaking up a little bit, Michelle.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
There is this presence, and that takes place. Am I better now?
Yeah, so I think it's getting better now. Yeah, but what I'm hearing is that, you know, there was this presence to death, just the same as there was a presence to birth, and how much, you know, yeah, we don't do that, right? We're like running off to, you know, oh, death is this thing, and we see this.
Right. We don't, and even
we see this with our old people too, right? Like once somebody gets to be like old and kind of incapacitated and sort of losing their stuff and their mind's going, like we put them in a little home and we see them once a month, and we don't really have contact with the aging process anymore. And you know, within that, we have lost so much, both within like the birthing experience of what that is, what that's all about, as a collective, you know, what it takes to birth life into the world, and you know what it means to die, what it takes, what the process of death actually is. And I think that by like losing some of that, we've added an enormous amount of fear, and just fear of the unknown. I mean, how many women in America, when they go to have their baby, they have never been present to another baby being born, ever. Mm-hmm. And like they've never seen it happen except for on YouTube. And like they don't,
or the documentaries like Ecstatic Birth and stuff like that. But other than that, there isn't really a context for that. Just as with death, again, there's not really a context for, usually we don't sit with people and watch them die.
No.
You know, unless you're a hospice nurse. Like my roommate is a hospice nurse, and so she's been present with people while they transition.
Yeah. And you know, it's a big deal to be present for that. There's a certain you know, it's one of the most spiritual things that you can be present for, is for, you know, when someone comes into the world and when someone leaves the world. And it is profound
Mm-hmm.
when you're there, when someone dies or when someone's born, for sure. And I think it changes your perspective on things greatly.
Absolutely. The only deaths for which I have been physically present have been for animals. I have been, and for me, it's, that's not a light thing. It's not just like, oh, an animal died. No, for me, this was um, as profound as if it had been humans. And the first one, the first one was my dog, my childhood dog, and I've spoken at great length about her. Her name was Ginger. And oh no, actually, the first one for which I was okay. Well, anyway, Ginger. So she passed in 2008, January of 2008. I had just returned back to the country. I'm very firmly convinced that she waited until I got back for her to go, because I had been back a very short time, and she'd been kind of, hanging around for me to come home so that I could be there for her. And I remember, I spent most of the day in the vet's office, and they very kindly set aside a room for us to sit in. It was me and my family sitting with my dog. And I filled the room with Reiki, and my mom too. We were doing Reiki, we were doing healing work, absolutely filled the room to the brim with this warm, juicy, comfortable energy, and just got to be with my dog. And I remember finally when the time came for them to come put her down, it was, I just remember I was so horrified about the color of the fluid that they were using to stop her heart. It was this like awful electric blue, and it looked so synthetic and so unreal and unnatural. I was just so repulsed by, that's the thing that's going to, make her transition and not be in her body anymore. I was so upset. And I just remember as I had my hands on her as her heart stopped, and I felt the entire room go cold. It got cold because she left and took all that energy with her. Mm-hmm. And as soon as she left, I was ready to be gone. I couldn't feel, she wasn't in her body anymore. What?
You just kind of went off.
Okay.
So that I didn't get.
That's okay.
As soon as she left,
I was okay to go. I was ready to go because I could feel that she wasn't there anymore. And it takes a lot of energy to die.
It does.
It takes a lot of energy, and that's why, looking at how cold the room went. Again, she needed all of that energy. It's like you the input of energy to cause a chemical reaction. It's that same sort of catalyst where then it can take place.
Yeah, and this is really important. One of my favorite authors, just kind of a lot in general, is Dion Fortune. And she wrote this book called Book of the Dead. And she wrote lots of books. She was a very famous esotericist, lecturer. She wrote a lot of fiction books too that had a very spiritual, esoteric nature. She wrote just a kind of a masterpiece on Kabbalah and psychic self-defense, very good. But she talks about the process of dying and how much that it does take so much energy. It takes etheric energy in order to pass, and that the traditions that we have around death actually have a psychic reason for them, that when someone's dying, that lighting candles and having fresh flowers all over the room, that gives them that energy that you're talking about that was pulled out of the room, that gives them some etheric energy to pull from, because otherwise they will actually pull etheric energy from the person that's sitting in the room if there are no, these living flowers and candles, this light. She also talks, I think, around you know, and in different traditions, they talk about how long it takes the spirit to leave the body, which can be quite a large space of time. A lot of times, you know, it takes like 3 days, and or even more. It can take less. You know, if somebody's sort of already, like, a lot of their life force has mostly left their body and their body's just sort of being kept alive, then it might be really fast. But like closing, then they were like closing the drapes and the curtains in the olden days. It was because they wanted to give the spirit enough time to fully disengage and leave, instead of just like, oh, the window's open, and for it to become this disjointed thing. There was a lot of consciousness around how people died, and then helping them through that process of leaving. And, you know, she also talks about how important it is to pray, to be in prayer. And if you can't be present with the body, to imagine yourself near the body praying 3 times a day. And that energy helps the spirit to move. And I think that we read around the same time The Smell of Rain on Dust. Did you read that a few years ago?
I didn't finish it, but yeah, it came up around the same time, and yeah, I didn't get all the way through.
Yeah, well, he talks a lot about, this is also an amazing book on grief and dying, and he talks a lot about the energy of crying, of screaming and wailing and praying, and all of the energy that you know mourn is actually there to help that person move through what they need to move through to get to, you know, where they're going.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a form of that offering, a form of that service. And again, you know, so like you mentioned, Kat, the candles and the flowers, also music and all that prayer while the transition is happening. It's, think of it like, you know, if a spirit's setting off on a journey, or somebody's setting off on a journey, you want to make sure they have a full tank of gas to get where they're going. So you're creating that bubble of energy. You're giving them the full tank of gas to, again, it's, I keep coming back to birth. We have to talk about birth when we talk about death. We have to. Yeah. And because these are our bookends, our rites of passage of coming into the earth plane and leaving the earth plane. It takes a lot of energy to be born. It takes a lot of energy to die. You are shifting into form, you're shifting out of form. There's this, you know, and at both ends, you are in your God consciousness. That's the other thing, is the wheel of life. You start at, you know, you're part human, you're part God. You don't speak human yet. And you go through your wheel of life. For those who are curious, there's a book that I really recommend about this called Nature and the Human Soul by Bill Plotkin. And he goes through the human evolutionary phases in terms of these different nature-based and spirituality-based phases. And, you know, we start at God consciousness and we go all the way through the whole idea of like, okay, you develop a sense of self. Then you develop a sense of who am I in society, who am I really in relation to these people, develop a sense, and you develop a sense of eldership. But again, this is healthy human spiritual psycho-spiritual, there we go, healthy human psycho-spiritual development. And then eventually you come back to your God consciousness and then you die. So this is the times that we are, where the veil is thinnest, where we are closest to spirit. And there's so much, again, in that modern society, so much separation. We don't witness births, we don't witness deaths, unless you're in a very specific, like, calling that in, or in a specific tradition, religious or spiritual tradition that that requires that, or that makes space for that. And that's one of the reasons we're talking today about the Day of the Dead, which is a Latin American-based, Mexican-based tradition that has proliferated into the popular consciousness. And so it creates some space for us to talk about our relationship to the dead, to talk about our relationship to this process of transition.
Yeah. And fascinatingly also seems to occur around the All Hallows Eve and the traditions from a completely other side of the world, which held this time as a time where we were closer to the veil was thinner, and we were closer to being able to speak to the dead and communicate with them, that they would come and walk the earth at these times. And so, you know, maybe if a few people from all over the world kind of come up with the same idea, it might have a little bit of resonance. And I think that we can all, those of us who are sensitive, we can feel that energy that is at this time of year. And, you know, that there is a concept which a lot of us have lost in modern society, of a very profound honoring of the dead, of our ancestors. You know, we've, just like when we wheel the old people off to the nursing home, when we forget about them, we forget about our dead. We don't, you know, and some people don't, but a lot of us as modern people, we aren't spending time going to grave sites and putting flowers and making altars for our ancestors and those things. It's not a very common part, but in this Day of the Dead, really is a hearkening back to these traditions which were held all over the world, of honoring and remembering and holding the dead as sacred teachers and guides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are so many things to talk about. I'm just kind of like making my list of like, oh, we can talk about the animal guides who work with the dead. Okay, we can do that. But so we've talked a little bit about, you know, kind of the death process. It takes a lot of energy to die. Why is visceral moment of transition? Why is it really good for us to actually not only be present with the moment of death and with the death process, but, you know, we've kind of danced around it. What do the dead have to offer us, and what do we have to offer them?
Yeah. Well, they have access, right? They have access to a plane that we don't really have access to at this time. I mean, some of us do, but they have an awareness. They have an awareness of a spiritual realm. And you know, in many traditions, it was seen that the ancestors, you know, they would build little like altars, like beautiful like temple spaces, and basically would go and offer food and incense and all of the things to keep the connection with maybe their grandfather, and basically ask that spirit to come and inhabit that place and protect them. And that was a huge part of it, was that they would protect them. They would offer them counsel. They would offer them support and healing, and you know, bring them luck and fortune and those things. An interesting thing that I have read on, you know, sort of these places. There's a lot of places in the world where this was a very strong traditional hold, and then recently the newer generations have sort of lost this. So there are a lot of beings that have been asked to be in a certain place, and then they're no longer needed or wanted, and they're like, now what? Which can kind of cause trouble for new people moving into that area and things like that. So sometimes it's like, if you're going to invest the time in doing it, you might as well keep it going.
Yeah, or afterwards, practice releasing.
Exactly.
Releasing the spirits, you know, to say, okay, yeah. So if you're, and actually this is a really good thing to think about, if you're, you know, when we're moving, for example, you're talking about inhabiting a space. When we're moving, it's really easy to think like, oh yeah, you know, when I move into a new place, I should cleanse it and clear it. But hey, when you're leaving a space, you should cleanse it and clear it too. You know, kind of release whatever guides and teachers have been present there for you, so that again, it's not that you're necessarily doing it for the people who are moving in after you, but you're doing it for the spirits, because they've been answering your prayers to be present there. And so then you can set them free, you can release them.
Yeah, because it can be confusing. If you have if you have a departed ancestor who's been kind of in a certain place for an extended period of time, and then they're like, okay, where'd my family go?
Right. Who are these people living in my house? Yeah. Exactly.
Because it's like, okay, well, I just invited a spirit to come here to protect me and protect this home. And now there's other people living here. They're still doing their job of protecting the home.
Yeah.
So, I have read a lot about how this can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not to freak anybody out, but
right. Yeah, but maybe lends an element of compassion of, like, if you're living in a house where you feel energies that feel like they don't belong, consider, why are they there in the first place? And have some compassion that way, but then also kind of claim your sovereignty of, like, all right, I'm going to invite you to leave. I'm going to invite you to transition onwards. And again, it's not a blamey thing or a scary thing or anything at all. But it is
well, and the thing is that we can create the conditions so that spirits are here instead of moving on to the next possibility. And that's something to really look at for ourselves.
Yeah. I think this ties into a little bit of what can we offer them. So, what can we receive from the dead? We can receive protection. We can receive guidance. We can receive, if you have your beloved ancestor, your beloved, grandparent or great grandparent who passed on, I hear from my grandmothers, not really my grandfathers, but I hear from my grandmothers every now and then, and I really love it. And I have items of theirs, and yet also there's an aspect of service that keep in mind, lineage clearing is coming up for everybody right now. This is a huge thing in our modern context, where all of the past shit that's been in all of our lineages, all our ancestors were holding all these wounds, it's all coming up to be purged. It's coming up to be cleansed. And that's part of the most important service or one of the most important ways that we can be of service to our ancestors, is to clear, for not only for ourselves, but to clear whatever it was from their soul contracts, their agreements, that is present in the lineage until it is removed. So even after you're deceased, even after these beloved ancestors have passed on, it will still be in their lineage until a descendant goes and does the work to take it out.
Yeah, this is very important. And if you are having visitations and those kinds of things, this is something to look at. Another thing that the deceased can offer us, and which has happened for a lot of people, is that they then can become sort of an assist on being able to do mediumship work with other deceased people. They sort of kind of help become the go-between and to help you. Yeah, they're the translator. So they're able to help you do that work. So I know a lot of people who have a grandmother or an aunt or someone on the other side who actually helps to bring the other spirits into and bring those translations through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any other ways that we can be of service to them?
We can help them to transition. We can help them to move on. There are a lot of different writings about what happens after you die. There's also a book, big fat book, called The Spirit's Book. And this is all channeled information through Allan Kardec. He was not a medium, but he collected mediums who brought through information from the other realms. And they did, in the 1800s, they just did extensive question and research on what happens after you die, and what about reincarnation, and what about those things. So if you're interested in this is also an interesting book on, like, how do these things happen. But in a lot of writings, in Chico Xavier, he writes about this, and he was a medium who channeled over 400 books about the process of death, and how there's the process of disentangling from the body. There's the process of going into a space where a lot of spirits are sort of like in this kind of like, what's going on here? I'm kind of confused. And then going into, what some people kind of consider almost like a purgatory experience, where you're seeing and understanding, you're realizing everything that you did in your life and where you messed up, where you could have done better, all of those things, and going through into the next phase. Some people believe that you can't actually contact spirits when they're in that phase where they're in the review, because they're super busy and they're not supposed to be talking to people on earth. And that if we want to contact them, we really should wait for them to kind of end up on the other side of that process of kind of reviewing their life, and then be able to have conversations with them. But if we start like calling them back towards us too soon, like right away, it can cause confusion and cause them to get stuck. And so our prayers and our like love and like just like you said, like they're leaving on a trip, like they're going off, they're getting on the boat, and you're just like, I fucking love you. You're going to have a great time. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be epic. You're going to see incredible things. It's going to be so wonderful. And, like we're sad, they're gone. But to be able to kind of give them that experience of this send off of like, I'm going to be fine. And I love you and you're amazing. And, I'll see you again. I'll see you when you get back.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we can help them with that transition. We can also help them when a lot of people are actually, one of their services that they're called into is helping kind of those stuck souls transition and go into the light. And, a lot of times if you've had a like a traumatic death where you've been, in a wreck and you've just been thrown out of your body, and people sometimes don't realize that they're dead, or they've been killed in some kind of way, like they're just sort of in this, they don't know what to do next, and they're not really quite sure what's going on, and they're confused. And so if you're having a lot of experiences of like, oh my gosh, I think a lot of dead people are finding me, this might be like a skill set that you have of being able to help them transition, move into the light, to explain. Sometimes you have to explain, actually you're dead and you died, and you are in a place where you need to actually move and find the light and move into the next phase of what you're, of existence. And sometimes that's a necessary process that
Is that what the Sixth Sense was about?
Yeah, it was your for like the Sixth Sense boy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a real thing, by the way. All of that.
True story.
Yeah, yeah. The life review. I want to talk about that for just a minute. Again, not a uniquely human function. This is something, a significant portion of my work with animal communication, actually, in particular, was with, or has been with, animals who have passed on. And I have people contact me immediately after their dog or cat dies saying, oh, did I make the right decision? Or, there was some horrible accident or some, bizarre death or whatever the deal was. And I found, I noticed pretty early on that, oh yeah, it doesn't work to try to talk to them right away. Like it feels really different after letting them settle. But also it takes different amounts of time. Again, Kat, like you were saying, it kind of depends on what were the circumstances of the death. What, was there a lot to process from the life, or, were they in a really healthy place when they went, so they're ready to talk right away? A lot of it, again, it depends a lot on, and also on what kind of relationship did they have with death before they actually transitioned themselves.
Yeah.
Those people and animals who have a really good understanding and relationship with death go through that process so much faster. It's so much easier to say, oh yeah, okay, I get it. I understand what's going on. I'm cool with it. Like I move through my energy really fast. So then I'm that much more ready to be available to kind of come through and communicate and have myself put together, rather than the, I don't know what's going on. I'm really confused. I'm scared or upset or looking for answers or whatever the deal is. That takes much longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that we can do is that we have the ability, some of us have the ability to be able to receive and to bring messages from the dead. And there are a lot of cases where when someone dies, they have some sort of unfinished relationship experience or something. They didn't get to tell somebody something. They're worried about someone on this side. And they are looking for people who, and I know, Michelle, you probably have that experience of like walking through the grocery store and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go tell this person this thing. But
not as much anymore because I put my walls up. I don't like to be barraged or that kind of thing. But every now and then, yeah, if it's real strong.
Yeah. So, they're looking for people who have a sensitivity to be able to bring those messages through. And sometimes that's all it takes. They just need to just like land one message. They've just been focused on that. They land that message and then they can move on. And that's all you need to do. You don't have to do anything else. And you don't have to, too.
Yeah. All of this, again, practice your spiritual sovereignty. You get to say no. If you don't want to work with the dead, if you don't want to channel messages of the dead, you don't have to. Or if you want it to be within certain office hours, that's a great way to do that too. So again, Kat, like I don't get, since I put up my boundaries, since I figured out years and years ago, like, oh, I don't like being out in public and having this barrage of information. And, that's what boundaries are for, so that I can be in the world like a normal person and not be overwhelmed all the time. And yet I set office hours where, okay, if you want to come through and talk to me and either give me a message or whatever, then I'll kind of put up like, okay, my radar's open, like office is open, and then create time, to be of service in that way. This is another way that we, kind of be of service is in whatever energy needs to be channeled. So like Kat, you were talking about with, okay, a message passed on, or even just telling someone you're dead and this is what that means, or lighting a candle and giving enough energy, because maybe they didn't receive enough energy when they died to actually fully leave. So
nobody prayed for them, nobody mourned them, nobody cared that they died.
Yeah. And so then they just need an extra like input. Often, it's kind of surprising and then not at all surprising how often that's the case, where it just is like a little bit extra. It's like, okay, they need a candle lit for them and a prayer said, and then they're off to the light and they're super happy about it. But that's it. It's so simple. More often than not, it's really that simple.
Yeah. And, this is also one of the easiest, most simple, basic ways. Like we can go, oh my gosh, what should I do for, it's just like, just light a candle, just light a candle and just say a prayer and I love you. And like, let yourself just have that for whoever that it is that you are, mourning, or someone who died from your past, and just like light a candle, put out a flower, and like that's enough. You don't have to go through some kind of ridiculously complex ceremonial thing that you're have never been exposed to. Like the small things they help us too, and the other as well. So those, like lighting that candle and just being present and praying, it helps us through the process of what we're going through when we lose someone.
Yeah. That's the other piece, is how do we cultivate a really healthy relationship with death? So not only for the dead, but for us, for our society, in order to actually get the most out of the experience, to really have that presence and have that awareness. It's yeah, I don't know. I talk about this all the time. I think about this all the time, and I have a lot of opinions about it. But ultimately, my main takeaway is I am so glad that there is the Day of the Dead. I'm really glad that there is a holiday set aside that, it's like any holiday rooted in spiritual tradition, it's been sort of separated away from that. So looking at like, okay, people having, selling all the calaveras and like doing up the face paint, and they don't know what it means and they don't know what it's for.
Selling candy and
right. And all, the marigolds and all this stuff that, kind of the roots of it are lost. And yet they're still there. The reason behind it is still there. And I love that there's the more and more opportunities for people to cultivate a healthy relationship with something that is typically loaded with a lot of fear and a lot of resistance. Yeah,
for sure.
So I want to talk about what are some tools that you can incorporate into your practice. We've kind of given you a few already. There are 2 animal guides in particular who work with the dead or work with people who work with the dead. And I mean, of course, there are more than that, but these are 2 that are kind of tapping on me right now to be shared. And they are owl and crow/raven. Crow and raven are archetypally pretty much the same or very similar. Owl is the shepherd of the dead. And historically, owl has been viewed, there's a lot of fear around owl, mistrust around owl, and that's because they can see between the layers and they actually travel between the realms. So owl is one of the beings who works to help the souls move from one side of the veil to the other. They're a very, very powerful ally for anyone looking to do work with the dead. And crow, raven is the messenger of the dead. They're the ones who can speak the voices, share the messages, and sing, again, speak across the veils.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, when we feel a little bit lost, and then we can connect into an animal that can, help us, especially when we're like in the midst of the experience of someone dying or someone's just dead. A lot of times those animals are really helpful for us to be able to, do that kind of work and to be with it,
Mm-hmm.
So really,
yeah, it's more tangible.
Yeah, exactly. It's easier to like, oh, okay, this is where I'm going with this.
Right. I actually had, and I didn't used to know that about owl and crow. Of course, everything that I'm sharing here is stuff that they've told me directly. I first received that piece of information about owl a couple of years ago when I had an owl appear to me in sort of a slightly dramatic fashion. It flew right over me as I was walking through this park where I've never seen an owl before. And so it flew to land in a tree and then was kind of staring me down, looking at me. It was the middle of the afternoon. I think I woke it up walking through. And I was just standing there looking at it, and I heard either at that time or very soon after, but owl is the shepherd of the dead. And then within a day, maybe 2 days later, I had a friend contact me who had lost his child. His 14-year-old child had passed away unexpectedly, and he wanted my help in working with his deceased child. And then again, so owl was showing up to let me know, hey, you're going to be working with the dead. And it was, again, within a matter of days, like a day or 2 later. And that is some of the most challenging and wonderful work that I think I've ever done, is working with this child who passed away unexpectedly. And then again, most recently, I can't remember if I told the story about being attacked by an owl on our podcast.
No, I don't think you told the story.
I didn't tell us. Well, I was attacked by an owl a few weeks ago. It came and smacked into the back of my head. Like, seriously, it hit me so hard. It raised 2 bumps about this far apart. So like the size of an owl foot on the back of my head, that I had these bumps for about 5 days. And it was one of the most startling and cool and totally like astonishing experiences I have ever had in my life. Like, you never think that you're going to get attacked by an owl. And so that's the short version. But a few days later, I went and I did some healing work for myself and for my lineages, specifically like my deceased ancestors. That is some of the deepest healing work I have ever done. There was massive stuff that needed to be cleared in my soul contract, and the soul contracts of all of my ancestors had this same signature. And I spent hours just crying and chanting and channeling all this information for my dearly departed ones, my ancestors. And again, it was immediately after Owl came and smacked me in the head. So that's two instances of Owl kind of announcing, hey, you're going to be doing some big work with the dead.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I work a lot with Owl, and I recently, you know, really started working with a particular wing that I received for a very particular ancestral clearing, and you know, on cutting those and you know, those aspects of ourself which are so pulled into our lineage that you know, all of those that came before us are affecting us today. And you know, it's sort of, what else do we have as far as like tools of I think we've already given a lot.
We have, yeah. I think not being intimidated by it is another thing that I would recommend. You know, since there is a lot of emotional charge often in both our relationship with our deceased and then also whoever you're working with, quite often there is a great degree of either, you know, unprocessed emotion or stuff that feels really raw and sticky and hard. It's okay, and trust that, again, that's part of all that energy that needs to be released, all that energy that is coming through for the process, that it's, you know, it's again a natural part of what's going on. And one of the biggest questions, I will admit that I was very, very intimidated when this friend of mine reached out to ask me to work with his child who had passed. I was asking myself, can I do this? Am I up to this? Because I could feel how raw it was for everyone in the family. Yeah. And I worked with the whole family. I worked with, you know, this child's, both the parents and the siblings, the remaining siblings.
Yeah.
And I was really turned to work with it, trusting that working with the dead is not really any different from doing any other kind of spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Quite honest.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I think allowing yourself to have your own relationship to it, whatever it is, you know, to make the decisions that feel right to you, but, you know, because there's a lot of social conditioning, religious conditioning. You can't do that. That's not the way things are done. That's not appropriate. That's not okay. Like, and in certain families, you know, certain ideas about death have been passed down. You know, there's certain families where, like, they don't even want to have an open casket, or they don't want, you know, certain things to, you know, you have to, whatever it is, you have to wear black. I mean, there is a reason for wearing black, was is that you are being protected of your energy being drawn out of you. It's one of the reasons why the whole black thing is. But like, you really get to feel into what is this experience like. And I mean, you know, we're all going to die, so we all get to have this experience of death. And some of us maybe don't get to have the death that maybe we would plan to have because it's sudden or whatever, but you know, for a lot of us, we will go through the process of going, okay, I'm going to die. And what is that going to be like for me? And what is it going to be like for the people around me? And what is my experience of it? And how am I going to relate to it? And how am I going to talk about it? And, you know, currently I have a friend who has a family member who is dying, and the entire family is kind of pretending like it's not going to happen. And you know, and then it's like, okay, well, what do you do with that? You know, that, you know, our families often kind of set the stage for how we're going to interact with something as big as death. And for each one of us, we actually get to make some decisions on our own to decide, no, actually, this is what's important. Maybe this isn't so important to me. I can let you guys have that one. I don't need to stand my ground on that. But maybe this is really important to me because this means this. And this is how I'm going to do this death thing.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you get to have your own relationship with it.
Have you ever meditated with your death?
Like, yeah, like we're go through the process of dying.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good exercise to do.
It is, and I've never done it to full completion. I've kind of danced around it a little bit, but it's something that I think about a lot more than I think I meditate on it.
Right.
You know? Yeah, and there is a difference there. One thing I will share, one of the most common questions that I get, and Kat, I'm wondering if you've gotten this too, but, and again, this comes up in my animal communication work particularly, since I work with far more animals who are going through the transition process than I do with people. But one of the most common questions is, what would they like me to do with the body?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, the animals don't care. You know, it's kind of like a whatever feels good to you is really the most common answer that I get. Like very, very rarely has there ever been a really specific, I want to be buried in this place and I want this and this and this. Like almost never. For the most part, the animals, you know, and the dead in general, once we're releasing this form, it doesn't matter as much what happens to it because we're understanding like, well, that's not me.
Yeah, and in the spirits book they talk about, you know, well, what about, you know, funerals and tombstones and all of the things and the caskets and the flat, like all of that, that the spirits are like, yeah, that's for you guys. That's not for us. Like, do whatever makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And in certain writings, they're like, you know, whatever's going to get the body back into, you know, back into where it was started from, back into the earth as quickly as possible is awesome. And some traditions are very much like, you know, cremation is the way to go, and they have reasons for that. And then other traditions are like, no, like being in the earth is the way to go. And
others preserve the body forever and don't let anything happen to it.
Yeah, put it in a lead casket and make sure nothing's getting in.
Yeah.
You know, and it really is for us. It's for the humans. It's not for the people who have died.
Yeah.
So, you know, you get to decide, and you get to decide for yourself. Like, it really is a very much it's a helpful thing if you actually make these decisions before you die, so that the people around you don't have to be like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? Like, what did they really want? And would they want to be cremated? And would they want to be buried? Like, have these conversations. Like, talk to your partner, talk to your children, talk to your, you know, whoever, that like, look, just so you know, when I die, this is what I would like. Or write it down, create
Mm-hmm.
a will that says, this is what I would prefer, so that, you know, maybe like if you just want to be simple, I want to be put in a cardboard box and buried and put a tree on me, then that's great. Then maybe people don't have to go like crazy and spend $20,000 on some fancy oak casket, because you didn't want it in the first place. So like,
Right.
I think that goes into this whole thing around like taking the mystery and the trauma and the you know, the wonder out of death, and being willing to actually just say, yeah, you know, I'm gonna die and this is what I would like. I
Mm-hmm.
might not die tomorrow, but eventually all of us are going to die. Like
Yeah.
that's one thing we know for sure.
Yeah. Have you thought about what you want for that?
You know, I would just like to just be like as simply, as easily as possible, put me in the earth. I don't need any stuff. I mean, if you just put me in like a piece of cloth and put me in the earth, that'd be awesome. You know, like I'd love to just have a tree or whatever. Hopefully I won't die before my mom, because she's sort of obsessed with cremation. She has like these cremated, like all of the animals have been cremated, and that's not really what I would prefer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
all right, well, you're going on record now. This will be public record on the internet forever.
Yeah, plant a tree, put, you know, like where someplace the birds will like to come. That would be my wish.
Yeah, I'm on the similar page. I actually remember telling my mom when I was a young teenager, I think, you know, when I was first ever thinking about like, oh, what does my death mean? And I told her, I was like, just throw my body in the woods. You know, if I die, like throw me in the woods so the animals can eat me. And she says, I don't think we can do that. I think that's illegal. But but that was my, you know, get back to nature as quickly as possible. And that has some, I mean, that has like in the mythology of like leaving, and I actually had my astrologer friend tell me that somehow this came up in the course of a reading, right? Of course. And he's like, actually, that's what they used to do with, you know, to honor these people, was to leave the bodies up high, really high on the rocks, and let the buzzards come eat them and the vultures.
Yeah, they still do that in a couple of places.
Yeah.
As a burial reality, which is I find super fascinating and kind of love.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. You know, I'd love to be eaten, right? Yeah. Something that's gonna go.
And then you get to be just bones, which would be awesome.
Right. I get to have, you know, myself be carried back to spirit. That's the thing, is like by the vultures, the buzzards coming to eat the flesh, and then they fly and they carry you back to spirit.
Yeah, I don't think there's any place in America doing that. So
no, I don't think so either. So then, you know, you get into the logistics of like, okay, do I have to fly somewhere to die so that nobody has to transport my body? Like, you know, because that just gets messy, right?
But super complicated.
Right. But the other, you know, probably cleaner alternative, they're coming forward with all these green burial options now.
You become a tree and you just are like a thing, and there's a tree, and that sounds awesome.
This is something, I'm pretty sure it's in Italy. Kat, was I telling you about this? I love this idea where they have, instead of a cemetery, it's a forest, because you get to pick what kind of tree you want, and then they put you in sort of in the fetal position, like curled up in this bag under the tree roots, and then the tree composts you. So then instead of walking through a cemetery full of gravestones, you walk through a forest.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too.
We've got to get on track. I know in Portland and in Oregon, I've seen some green choices coming out. I haven't really noticed that here as much in Southern California options. But I know that when I was there, I was seeing some sort of like green options like that are coming to the forefront. And I think that you know, there are a lot of people who are taking this death question into deep consideration of how do we become in alignment with death again. Because really only when we become fully in alignment with death and birth do we become fully in alignment with life. Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I have to go have a client. But this was so much fun, Michelle. And I don't know if we have a topic for next week.
We might be doing sacred sites next week.
Okay, we might be. We'll see.
Maybe something else.
Again, back on our normal Shaman Sisters time, which is noon on Tuesday Pacific time. And that's our regular weekly time. You can see us every week live. You can watch us on YouTube at Shaman Sister Sessions. You can listen to us on iTunes or Stitcher under the same name. feel free to reach out to us via our Facebook page, Shaman Sister Sessions. You can send us a message or write on our wall. We love to receive inquiries or feedback on our sessions. Anything that you'd like to hear us talk about, we would love to receive your input. And
you can email to shamansistersessions@gmail.com.
And anything else, Michelle?
Nope.
All right. So thank you so much. Enjoy the Day of the Dead and your experience of however you feel is appropriate to honor the people that you have known that have passed over in your life, your ancestors, those that came before. And we wish you many blessings, and thank you for joining us.
Indeed. Bye.
Bye.